All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Susan Reynolds. I'm with Friends for Survival. I am the project manager, and I'm also on the board of directors of Friends for Survival. And we are so excited and honored to have Brandy Lidbeck with us this evening. I'm going to do a short introduction. So Brandy wrote this amazing book. I read it about a year ago, but then I read it again in February, and it's just wonderful. It's called The Gift of Second. And Brandy is a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a two-time survivor of suicide loss. She is the founder of thegiftofsecond.com, a website created for suicide loss survivors. Brandy has a heart for those who know the pain suicide brings and wants all survivors to experience healing in spite of their sorrow. So welcome, Brandy. Glad you're here.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay, and with that, we want to cover a lot of ground tonight, so I'm going to get started. I'm Marilyn Koenig, and I am the Executive Director of Friends for Survival for 37 years. And my son died by suicide in 1977, so 5 years later, before another mother and I even started this group. But it has been a whole new life for me, and as it is for most of you too, it's a whole different life when this happens. But I've seen a lot of good come out of all of this, for at least for me. And so in the process of the years, I met Brandy when she was living near Sacramento, and she came to our office, and she was just kind of trying to feel her way through it. And I was so impressed with everything that she had to say and how diligent she was. So I am so happy to have her here today. She now is the, are you executive director of the?
I'm the coordinator.
Coordinator.
Yeah.
In Fresno, California, and those of you out of the area, Fresno is south of Sacramento. Sacramento's more in the northern part of California. With a big metropolitan area like we have, it was a good place to have a central place for a survivor group, because we do have a large community here, and I would say a very extended family of counties all around our Sacramento area. So, and we serve all of Northern California basically with support groups. We have 8 support groups. But anyway, I want to have Brandy kind of give you a sense of what her history is, how she came about to being who she is at this point in her life, which is very different from what it was before. So my first question for Brandy is, tell us a little bit about your story about your mom's death and what happened to you as a child.
Yeah. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. And I see a couple familiar names down there, like Candy Hershey. So it's good to see you on there. So I grew up in what I thought, was a normal home. And my mom and my dad and my brother and myself. And it was just like 2 weeks after my 10th birthday. My dad and my brother were out of town, and I was just home for the week with my mom, and they were out at a camp. And that day, she, like, looking back now, she was doing whatever she could to get me out of the house. And she was like, how about you do this? How about you do that? Why don't you go play? Why don't you, like, all day long. And I kept saying, no, I'd rather just, as a normal 10-year-old, like, I just want to sit and watch TV all day, right? It's in the hot summer sun of Phoenix. And eventually she got me out of the house, and she said, you can come back at 3:30. And so I did. I came back at 3:30, and I found her. She had taken her life while I was gone. And this was back in 1991. So it's pre-cell phones, pre-anybody talking about suicide. So we just waited for my dad and my brother to get home, because there was no contacting them, and so went to a next door neighbor's house and just waited for hours. And I had never spent any time with this neighbor before, and I just remember thinking now I look back at it and what I do for a living now, but then I remember an officer came over to my house or to that house, and he just said, is there anything of your mom's that you want? And as a 10-year-old, without having anybody with me, I thought, oh my gosh, they're going to take everything of my mom's and just take it out of the house because she's dead. They'd already told me that she had passed. And I remember just saying, I made her this keychain. I want that keychain. In my head, I was thinking they were taking everything, right? And so he just brought me this keychain, and I still have it to this day. But that's just how little you know about death and, you know, and suicide. And so several hours later, my dad and my brother came home. And that's kind of how we started. That house was really traumatic for me to stay in, you know, because the trauma, I think probably all of you who have found your loved ones, you keep replaying that event over and over and over again in your head. And anytime I'd walk back in the house, I would imagine, you know, I'd be waiting for another person to find another person. And so my dad was understanding enough to say, we need to get out of this house because Brandy can't stay here. So we sold our house in 9 days, and within a month we were in a new house in a new city to get closer to my dad's parents to help raise me. I always say that we took the pictures off the walls to pack up our home. And then when we got to the new house, they just never went back up. And so we kind of just swept it under the rug. We never talked about it. Nobody talked about suicide back in, 1991. And there was no support groups. There was no internet to look for support. It was a shameful thing in my family's eyes. And so I allowed friends at school, at my new school, to just believe that my parents were divorced and I just happened to live with my dad. And so I never said a single thing to anyone. There was a lot of shame because for me, I think for survivors, there's kind of two camps that people fall in. There's guilt of I should have done something to prevent this. I should have known. Why didn't I do more? Why didn't, and I think a lot of people fall in that category, especially parents who lose children. But I think for kids, a lot of times who lose parents, there's a lot of, why wasn't I good enough? If I was better, then maybe they would have stayed. If I hadn't said that, or if I cleaned my room, maybe, so there was a lot of shame and embarrassment for me. Like, what would people think about my mom if they knew that she took her own life? And what would they think about me if they knew that my mom left me? So I just decided I wasn't going to tell anyone. So I never met another survivor until I was 23 years old. So 13 years later, I met my first survivor, and it was like talking to her for the first time was so, I felt like I was hearing everything that she said is what I had thought in my head for the last 13 years. It was so amazing to hear another survivor kind of have the same struggles and the same thoughts and the same, all of that. And so, when my mom passed, my brother and my dad thought that counseling and therapy would be like for the week. You don't need to do that. You just pull your boots up and you just get over it. And so we never really talked about it. And so at 23, I entered into therapy for the first time and really did a lot of trauma therapy around finding my mom. And a lot of just kind of what that does to you is you feel unsafe. You feel like nobody's trustworthy, for me as a child, losing a parent. So that kind of got me into therapy, and I went every week for 5 years of just really going through the abandonment and the betrayal. I felt like it was really intentional that she wanted me to find her. I really struggled with that for a long time since my dad and my brother were out of town, and she knew I was going to be the only one that could find her, and she just coaxed me out of the house. So I felt like it was a real big, like, intentional, I care so little about you that I'm okay with you walking in on finding this. And it was a violent death, unfortunately. And so just feeling like just not loved, not valued, so really struggling through that in counseling and kind of processing through that. And then I think I got to a place where I was 28 and I was like, I'm good to go. I just got married. My husband and I were good. And I was like, I don't think I need therapy anymore. So, and I really, my wedding was, like, it was obvious that she wasn't there, but it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like I didn't have my dad to walk me down the aisle. It was, it was just my mom, and she hadn't been there for most of my life. So I get through the wedding and I come back home, and my husband and I are like making our first grocery list together as husband and wife. Like, what do you want to eat? What do you want me to make? What, all that stuff. And every idea that he had was like the worst idea ever. And I was just like, this is a stupid idea. I don't want to make that. And he was like, what is going on? And this is 2 weeks after my wedding. And he's like, I don't think this is about the grocery list. Is there something else going on? And I just broke down sobbing, and I was like, my mom missed my wedding. You know, she should have been at my wedding. And it really hit me like, why is this coming up now when she had died 17, 18 years prior? And I hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about her, but it's those big milestones that come up where you think you're in your new normal, and you think like, I'm getting along just fine. And then some big life event happens, you know, like you have a wedding or a divorce, even. It could be good or bad. You have a child, someone else dies, you lose a job, you know, all those things. And it kind of just brings it right back up to the surface of, man, she missed out on, you know, my whole life, but my wedding. And then I brought home 3 kids from the hospital, you know, when I delivered babies, and she missed all those. And so those are the things that kind of bring it back up to the surface. I'm kind of skipping around. I don't know, are we?
I have a question for you, Brandy, since current question. Did you ever get your dad to talk about it, or did Dad ever get kind of healed, or did he, you know, you initiated, he initiated? What did you do about this quietness from your father?
Yeah, so we did not talk about it at all growing up. And if we did, he would just start sobbing, and he couldn't talk about it. It was so, it kind of just made it really uncomfortable. And so my brother and I never brought it up. But what happened in 2004, so right around when I started the therapy, actually, this is what started the therapy. My mom's mom passed away. And that was, they gave me a bunch of her belongings. They said, oh, this is for you. It's her stuff. And so I went to open it, but it wasn't her stuff. It was actually my mom's stuff that she had taken back when my mom passed. So I'm seeing all my mom's possessions for the first time, 13, 14 years later. And it was like oh my gosh, not only did my grandma pass, but it was like another part of my mom had passed, like another part of like, don't really know my mom. And now I really am not going to know her because her mom is gone, you know? And so that kind of brought in a whole bunch of stuff. And so at that time, I started writing letters to all of my mom's friends and all of my family. And I just said, I have a bunch of questions for you about my mom, about who she was, what her personality was like. And I just want all of you to answer them in writing so I can keep them forever. And just tell me about her, the good, the bad, the ugly, what you knew, what you didn't know, what she had disclosed to you, maybe like just looking for those signs that I was too young at 10 to even ask about, you know, like, were there any signs or was there anything? And so my dad, I sat down with him one day. He answered all the questions in letter. I asked him to, so I could reference them later. We went out to breakfast one day, and I just, you know, like emotionally vomited everything that I, you know, just stuffed inside for however many years, 15 years or whatever. And he just told me everything. And so that was like probably the only time that we've ever just spit it all out. But other than that, it's kind of really never been talked about. He has read my book. He said he liked it. So that's about it though, really.
That's interesting. I think it's helpful to people who have young children to kind of get a sense of, you know, what your experience was. So how do you think the lack of your having a mother, you know, when you were a young teenager, whatever they call preteens, I guess they call them preteen. How did this affect, how do you think, looking back now, how did this affect maybe how you parented your children so far?
Yeah. I mean, at that age, I was just kind of like, if you show any emotion, you're weak, right? Because that's kind of what I was growing up with my dad and my brother. So kind of just built this like shield of, you know, be strong. And so I really try to just like, with my kids, just try to be an open book. I know that one thing that I do a lot of that my husband doesn't really, I don't know if he sees the significance because he grew up with 2 parents and, you know, not this, but when my mom was alive, like Christmases were really special and the house was decorated and birthdays were really, you know, all those things like homemade birthday cakes and homemade this and that, cards for Valentine's Day, all that stuff. And then when the day she died, that all stopped, but I was still only 10. So it would have been nice to have all that stuff, right, still. So I actually make sure that my kids have all of that stuff, right? So I go above and beyond, like, we're decorating for this, you know, like you get lunch box notes and you do, because I was like, I didn't get that. And so I want my kids to like know that they're valued and they're loved. And that their mom is like thinking about them all the time, you know? And so I also started a journal for each of them when I was pregnant with them. And I just write in it that I'll give it to them one day when they're, I don't know, married or something, just to speak to their value and their worth and how much I love being their mom, because I want them to hear the things that I never did, you know?
So then what prompted you to get in? I know it's part of this story, but
Yeah.
the reason I wrote these questions was, how did you get, what prompted you to start? I mean, you did the therapy, but after that, and you get married and you have 3 children.
Mm-hmm.
What happened next?
Yeah, so after my 3rd one was born, just a few, like 5 months later, I found a tumor in my carotid artery. And it was a crazy, rare thing, especially for someone my age. Sometimes they find it in elderly folks, but I was 30, I think. And so I was going to have this surgery. I ended up being in the ICU for a bit. And it was this crazy thing. So the week before I went to have the surgery, I went back to that therapist just because I was kind of having anxiety about, if I didn't make it through the surgery, I'd be leaving my kids without their mom as well. And I was having anxiety about that. Like, I know how horrible that is, and I don't want my kids to be without their mom. So recognizing it's still out of my control, but really kind of just wanting to process through that. So I go back to my therapist, the same therapist that I went to for those 5 years. And there was a Friends for Survivor support group meeting that night in that office. And I was like, what is that? And my therapist was like, oh, there's this group for suicide loss survivors. And I was like, I'm a licensed therapist given at the time, and I had no idea that the group for survivors even existed. And so I was like, what? They have groups for survivors? And she said, yeah, they meet here once a month or whatever. And in all of those years, I never knew that, I don't know how long they were at that office, you know, in Auburn. But they happened to be there that one time that I went back to the therapist. And so I called you guys the very next day in my head just to say, thanks for doing what you do for fellow survivors. Like, that's really cool. And whoever answered the phone, I don't remember. It wasn't you though, Marilyn. It was a woman who had lost her lost her ex-husband. And
Barbara.
Yeah.
Barbara.
And so she said on the phone, I will never forget this, because other than that one friend that I met at 23, I really had no other, you know, survivor experience relationship. And she said on the phone that her son, who lost his father at 20 something, young 20s, that how little must he have value if his dad could leave him. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've thought that my whole life, right? So her kid was saying the same thing when his dad took his life. And I thought, we can't be the only two who think that. That was honestly, but the first time I had heard it. And I thought, oh my gosh, somebody else feels the same way. I don't know if it was because I thought I might die in this surgery. I don't know. And I just said, I'm going to start a website. And so I started the website of thegiftofsecond.com, and just thought maybe 1 or 2 people would, like check in and just read some blogs about fellow survivors. And within a couple months, it was like tens of thousands of people were coming to the website. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a real thing where like survivors all over the world feel the same way, you know, a lot of times. And so then from that success, I was just like, I went and did an interview with Marilyn and got to meet you. And that's the day that we were talking. And I said, I'm thinking about writing a book. And so you said, you should do it. And I did. And that kind of took off too. I mean, it's sold like 7,000 copies so far. And it's endorsed by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Like, it just kind of took off as well. And then that kind of led to my current job of just working with survivors. And we do a loss team. So we show up at the house immediately after a suicide takes place. We usually get there before the coroner even arrives. And we provide immediate support to fellow survivors, and we give them no charge therapy moving forward. And we give them supplies on how to talk to kids and what to say and what not to say. And we give them a ton. We give them books, we give them everything. And we do it 24/7. And that has been the coolest joy in my life, to be able to provide for families today what I never had that that time at 10 when I was sitting at a neighbor's house with a stranger, you know?
So what do you think fuels your fire that you felt led to do something beyond just your own personal, find help for just your own personal needs?
I think looking back at all those years of not having anybody to talk to, I just think, man, what a horrible, lonely place. And I know that I'm not the only one that had that experience. And so really wanting to provide for others what I didn't have, you know, kind of that paying it forward thing of, I think when you lose someone to suicide, it feels so hopeless, and you feel so helpless, and lost and angry, and, you know, all that stuff. And so I just think, man, why not just support others, you know, just kind of like you, just support others who are going through this horrendous thing.
Have you talked to your children? Share a little bit about maybe how old are your children, first of all?
They're young. Right now they're 5, 7, 9.
Okay. Have you talked to them about their grandmother they never had? And how did you go about that? Or, you know, how's that going for your family?
Yeah.
And your husband, he's, you know, he got kind of pulled into something he probably wasn't planning on.
Yeah, well, it's ironic. So what I didn't say earlier is right before we got married, my cousin came home from Iraq and he also took his life. And then my husband, as a teacher, he lost one of his favorite students about 2 years ago to suicide as well. And so he is now a survivor. So he's kind of, I guess he's married to the right person and as far as like walking him through that. But I have told my kids, my older ones, my 9 and 7-year-old, no. My 9 knows more than my 7. My 5 doesn't know much. It's not like they knew her and then they lost her, right? So it's kind of just this person that they'd never met, you know? So it's kind of a little bit different, but I have explained to them, and they see my books sometimes around the house. So they know that I, you know, they asked what the word suicide meant. So I told them, but I'm of the firm belief that you got to tell the truth, right? And so many families, especially parents, get really nervous about telling their kids what happened because they're so scared that their own kids are going to think about taking their own lives, or they don't want to, you know, whatever reason. I hear it all the time. And so what happens though usually is that those kids will find out another way, and it won't be from the parent whom they trust. You know, they'll see it on a death certificate, or another family member will tell them, or they'll hear whispering, you know, or, and so I always say, like, you got to tell the truth. And then you could process through what suicide looks like and why that might've happened. But you can say like, hey, this is what happened. He or she wasn't, you know, was sick. And let's talk about if you ever get to a place like that, like what we can do, right? Educate. So I try to tell them, I don't give any graphic details because they're pretty young, but it is kind of surreal to think that my oldest son is just about the age I was, you know, when my mom passed, just a couple more months. And he's so helpless. Like he can't spread, you know, he can't make his sandwich. He can't, you know, there's so many things that he still needs help with. And I think, gosh, that's the same age I was when she passed. Like to see him so young, it's crazy.
Well, when you told the children that your mother was sick, died when you were 10, did you explain sick to them? Because that you have to be really careful with that. So
Yeah.
how did you go about that?
It's kind of been in a bunch of phases, Marilyn, because it is, you know, I talk more to my older one. My middle one doesn't really care. My younger one doesn't really, you know, he's too young. So I have just said stuff like her brain wasn't working really well, and she, you know, she was really sad, and she wasn't doing, I mean, I'm kind of trying to think what I've said, but she ended up taking her own life, and what that looks like, you know, kind of like just explaining like she was really hopeless, and she didn't understand that there was hope available, you know, but she couldn't see that. And so she took her own life. And I want to believe that she would think that was looking back, was a horrible choice. But I don't know if, I just try to, he hasn't asked a ton of questions about it. And so I kind of am just going to let him lead that. If he has more questions, I'll answer them. And again, I think it's a little harder when they've never met her, right? Versus someone who was in their life and is now not there,
Right. Yeah. Because that's a hard thing for parents. And I kind of encourage parents and all of you that might be listening, if you're in this place with young children, that you probably is a good idea perhaps to talk to a therapist to get some guidelines on how you're going to explain this to them now or later down the road, or how, the progression and age appropriateness. And because if you just said they were sick and they died, well, first of all, they got to know what dying is, but then they can be scared and thinking that if you get sick, are you going to die too? Or if I get sick, am I going to die? So you have to say something more than sick. The word sick, I mean, they can relate to, but how they process sick, is something we have to be very careful about how we say that. So that's kind of what I was getting at, is because you really should get some extra help to try to do that, and so that you can do it as best possible for young people.
Right.
So they don't have to spend 10 years like you did, or 13 years of nothing. But in your father's defense, there wasn't anything available in those days for him either. Nothing.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it would be typical for a man and a dad to have a stiff upper lip and just plow through. I've got 2 kids to take care of, and I'm just going to have to do whatever I have to do to raise them. And so that would have been his priority, was just to raise your kids, not for himself personally to cope with it. And there wouldn't have been any guidelines back then about how to talk to children about suicide. There would not have been anything. So there would have been no place to go, literally no place to go, and no books, no research, nothing. Because I always remember, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I went to an AA conference, and the national conference, and I just remember this psychologist or psychiatrist who was up giving a talk about a suicide and grief, and he said, I remember exactly what he said. He said, children don't grieve. And so they really didn't understand enough about children and about how they just go off, and you can say something to them and they'll go off and play. In some ways, I think the kids are wiser than we are, because they take it piece by piece. They don't, they take a break from the grief. They take a break from the hurt, or they take a break from what's going on. And of course, they got shorter term memory, that they can focus on something. They're short term learning sometimes, and so on. So you have to take all that into consideration. But obviously, you've done a great job and had a good rapport with your children and your whole family. So, but to go from a mother of 3 young children and suddenly be in the spotlight with your book and all of that, I was going to ask you how your life has changed. We kind of have an idea, but what are you thinking about it now? I mean, what have you been doing? Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing in Fresno, California.
Yeah. So I work with survivors, obviously. I do the loss team. I have been speaking around the country, which has been a cool opportunity, speaking at the upcoming American Association for Suicidology conference. I think, though, my favorite thing is doing the loss team, because the really cool thing about a loss team is there are volunteers that go out on each call with you, and all these volunteers are also survivors. And so it does like a healing for your own loss too, every time you get to go and meet with a new survivor, right? And so My loss team has, I think we have 27 volunteers, and it's the coolest thing. Like those 27 people are really just something special, and to be able to go out and serve the next one, it's a really neat experience to serve alongside them. So
About how many times a month does the lost team go out?
yeah, so I just did some numbers today. We average here about 2 a week. But so we average about like 115 a year.
So that is about the number of suicides you have in your area, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the county or the coroners call you?
Yeah, police dispatch call us. And so, or the coroner, but, and then we just go out immediately 24/7, and we're there within the hour. We usually stay for 30 to 60 minutes. Today I just ran the numbers, and our average stay is like 53 minutes at a house. And then we leave, but then we follow up with them, throughout the year, and
Okay.
support groups and all that stuff. But
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. But how are you feeling about the national, how are you doing you said you're doing some talks nationally.
yeah,
So what's that like?
I love it because I just think, man, if I was new in my grief, I would really love for somebody to stand up and say, what I'm already thinking in my head, right? The stuff that we didn't have back then, Marilyn. Kind of like what the book is, right? Like, just, this is what I want you to have. Had I had this, it would have been really helpful. So I just love that opportunity, because then you get to just speak to new survivors and older survivors. And there's just that commonality of, like, my favorite quote is by Brene Brown. It says, the two most powerful words when we're in struggle is me too. And I think that's, kind of like why the Me Too movement last year, with all the, the sexual harassment and all that, really took off, because you have all these people who are gaining courage and gaining strength to speak their own story and to heal, because other people before them were willing to speak up. And so I think that's kind of like what I like to do, give strength to the next person who's just going to start this journey themselves.
So how are you getting your are you physically going out in the country, or are you doing it virtual?
Well, with COVID,
Well, now, yes.
yes, the conference is now virtual. It was going to be in Oregon. I'm scheduled to go to Wisconsin later this year. Hopefully that happens. So kind of a little bit of both, just kind of when different events come up. But I really enjoy it. That's I love doing that.
Okay, what were you going to be speaking about in supposedly in Portland, but now you're doing it virtually. But
yeah.
Kind of, what was your topic and what were you covering?
Yeah, so a little bit of that Me Too. The topic was courageous healing within community. The idea is you can't do it alone, but what that looks like. So kind of just going through like the common feelings and emotions that survivors experience, right? Because a lot of times we tell ourselves that we're alone, nobody understands, nobody gets it. When if we had just 48,000 suicides last year, and everyone, even if conservatively each one had 10 survivors, that's, what is that, 480,000 people every year becoming a survivor just in the US alone. And so when we think we're alone and nobody understands, you look around and there's 500,000 new people every single year that are survivors on a conservative level. But we don't talk about it. So just kind of the idea of you're not alone. Let's kind of go through what's the common stuff, just so you think, oh, I talk to people all the time who feel like I'm so crazy. I feel like I'm crazy. I'm losing my mind. I'm not sleeping. I'm this, I'm that. And so just to normalize that for them. And then kind of just talking about the power of that Me Too, power of knowing other people. And then like, what does that look like? Because some people hate support groups, right? Some people don't want to ever do therapy. They never want to step in a therapist's office, but there's events, there's these kind of things, right? There's your mailings. I think those mailings, Marilyn, that you guys send out are fantastic, because from afar, even if you don't want to ever get involved with anything, you get this like little thing in your mailbox every month that says, you're not alone. here we are in California and we're thinking about you in South Dakota or, you know, or wherever. And we get it, you know? And so I just think that there's power in, or like you guys had, what's her name? Ronnie Walker on recently with Alliance of Hope. Same thing, like there's so much online that I wish was online in 1991. I wish there was an online, period. But just to kind of be able to say like, you're not alone and we are in this together.
Well, and I have through the years have determined that really our monthly newsletter is the most important thing we do, because we get to connect with people on a monthly basis with something, a little bit of something, and something encouragement, letting them know we're still available. We are available by phone, but I have found that most people don't call back a second time. I think they don't want to bother. They're so gracious that they think that you're taking up their time. We're taking up their time. So, but the newsletter, to me, from what I can tell, is probably the best thing we can do. And you know, if all else had to be shut down, the last thing we would shut down would be a newsletter. It is far more important, because everybody's not going to come to a meeting, and it's a good thing, because we'd have to rent the community center.
the arena. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been crunching some numbers lately too, and we have helped over 11,000 families in 37 years.
That's amazing.
But compared to the numbers of people that have died all those years, that's just nothing. That is such a little, small percentage. I can't imagine. I don't know in the last 30 years how many people have killed themselves, but 11,000 is maybe, I don't even think it's 1%.
Right. But you think of like those 11,000 are not walking around hope like aimlessly because of you, you know?
Yeah. But, we had 5 or 6 really good people that started in the beginning, and they were very dedicated, and we'd all had a suicide death. Some had lost husbands, and some had lost children and siblings. And so we just did it from our gut in those days. I wish we'd have had something that gave us some guidelines and taught us something, but they weren't there. So we just sort of did it from our own gut and how we all felt like. And it's been amazing to me. It's absolutely amazing. I don't know, the group in Fresno started, what year did they start?
Hey, Marilyn, I don't mean to cut you off, but we got to allow time for questions.
Yes.
Okay. I've been giving you a signal, but you haven't been saying.
Oh, I saw the signal, but I thought it was one question. And anyway.
No. I asked everyone that's attending, if you have a question, please raise your hand. But
okay, let's do some questions, and we'll swing back if we got time.
Well, yeah, if we have time. But I did want to. I wanted to talk to Brandy a little bit. There was a comment that one of our people had asked that, I don't know if you can see the question. Can you see the comment?
Yeah.
So Herlinda, I can answer that first. It just happened to me probably for the first time last night, when we had a gentleman on our call with us in the suicide support, in our bereavement support group, that just lost someone 2 weeks ago. So just being with him, and Marilyn had talked to him, I called him yesterday, and being on the phone with him, because I have healing behind me, being able to just, if he were in my presence, I would just wrap my arm around him and just stand there and hold his hand and let him be still, let him cry, do whatever. For me, it's a calling, I guess I'd have to say. I really feel that I've been called to do that. I'm trying to just, I've been there, and I don't know how else to better describe it. I just feel like I can do the most good by just grabbing that person and holding their hand and wrapping my arms around them and saying, I'm right here. And I've walked this path. So Brandy, what do you think?
Yeah. So the question is, like, it's odd to her that going to the scene of a suicide being my favorite part of the work. It seems so traumatic. It is my favorite, because I think that we are the best part of the worst day of their life, right? And so we go and we provide support. And like Marilyn was asking, what do you talk to the kids about? How do you say it? Well, we provide a whole packet on how to talk to kids, and we provide information on, we give out a book that as a little boy who lost his dad. And we give out free therapy, and we give out, teddy bears for the little kids to kind of hold that night for, forever. We go and provide resources so that they're not alone. We give them all information on how they're going to bury their loved one, or the cremate, like all the resources in town. And we're coming and just like delivering it in a package saying, you are not alone. We are going to be in touch with you. We will call you next week. You can call us anytime. Like, you're not alone. So like, if someone had done that to me when I was waiting for hours for my dad and my brother to show up, that would have been so. If someone had just said, they're not going to take all of your mom's possessions, he just wants to know if you want a comforting thing for the next few hours while you wait. That would have been really good for me to know, instead of thinking they're over there emptying my house of all my mom's possessions, right? So someone to sit with me and tell me, like, here's what's going to happen. And so we tell them about the process of the coroner coming and how long they're going to be there and stuff. So we're providing them with information, and it is my favorite part, because we get to do for survivors what I would have loved to have done to us.
I agree. I wish I was that person for my family. And for 3 days, I was able to hang on. And then after that, I talked to Marilyn, I think on day 2, and Marilyn was that person for me, just, very calmly, as I, tried to pull myself out of bed. I was exhausted. I'm just glad I had Marilyn to be able to be there for me, because I had to be there for my family, and everybody was looking to me for support and guidance. But anyway, so it's not easy. You have to be in the right place to be able to really give yourself, again, the healing. But we sit and cry together. We did last night with when we were in our support group call. And everybody had lots of helpful things to add to help this person that was really going through very traumatic time.
Yeah. I can't see questions, so I have no idea what questions we've got.
Well, I don't, anybody else have any questions? If you can raise your hand, or I can unmute your microphone if you'd like to, have just verbally ask your question. Come on, you guys, there's enough of you on there. I know one of you has a question.
Yeah, let's hear them.
Yeah. Any questions? No? Anyone?
So I would then, I'll talk a little bit, and please.
Oh, hold on a sec. I'm sorry, Marilyn. Candy Hershey has a question, calling from Montana.
Good.
I have unmuted your microphone, so go ahead and ask your question.
I would like to know how to start a, what did you call the group that goes out, Brandy?
Yeah, hi, Candy. They are called LOSS teams, LOSS. They stand for Local Outreach to Suicide Survivors.
Ooh.
There's, I think there's 47 in the US, and then a couple internationally as well.
Oh.
So you could just go to like LOSS, I think it's lossteam.org.
Okay.
Yeah, or you could just, I think you could just reach out to me, and I can connect you and help you, kind of figure out how to get started.
They even have their own national conferences and so on too. The person that started it was Frank Campbell, and he is a fabulous guy. And I'm hoping that he'll be one of our speakers at one of our webinars in the future. I haven't contacted him, but I don't think he can say no to me. So
No one can say no to you.
No.
But I will tell you why in Sacramento we don't have the LOSS team, because there's too many suicides. And what I do is I train law enforcement chaplaincies, chaplains here in Sacramento. They have all of our materials and brochures, and we recently published a new resource for people when the chaplain leaves and the coroner leaves, or they knock on your door and say that so and so died, da da da. They have materials up that have our name on it, but it's just like, what do you do today? What do you do right now?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's up to them whether they contact us, but we would have to go out, maybe 2 or 3 times a day, unfortunately. I mean, and there's just no way we can manage that. But we do have some wonderful chaplains do sit with families and do give them some materials and they do a follow-up question. They do a follow-up with them too in about a week too. So they do some follow-up. Sometimes I've had chaplains call me when they're still at the house, and I'll be talking to people. So that's kind of how we've done it. I don't know if we ever could get to the point of trying to be out at every one of those calls. There's in the metropolitan city like this, it's just too many.
I've heard of these groups. I didn't know that there was more than, just one in a city that I heard about. I was shocked to find out that Montana has the highest suicide rate in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a support group here in my town, and I contacted the leader, but I haven't been to one of his meetings yet. I've had other things I've had to do, but I hope to, and to become more involved in my community in this way too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brandy.
Yeah, it's good to see or hear you, Candy.
Good to see you.
I think Candy was the one who was facilitating the group, but you went to that first time?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
She stepped out for a bit, so then I took over, and then she came back, and then we just kind of handed it back and forth.
Yes. So Brandy used to help us out as a facilitator at one of our meetings, and so did Candy. So they sort of have a relationship beforehand, which has been wonderful. But Candy was the one that found that counseling center that gave us the free space to have a monthly meeting there. So we all try to work together on this and try to help one another in any way we can. So any other questions?
Yeah, does anybody else have another or just a comment, a question? Go ahead and raise your hand and I will call on you and unmute your microphone. Yeah, go ahead, Marilyn. You can continue and I'll keep an eye out.
Okay. So let's see. We only have about 9 minutes left before.
I'm sorry, Jennifer has a question.
Oh, good. Jennifer.
Sorry, Marilyn.
That's good, Jennifer.
Go ahead, Jennifer. Oh, Jennifer, we can't hear you.
Unmute.
Yeah, I did. I unmuted her.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So I work for the 211 Helpline Center of South Dakota. And in the Sioux Falls metro area, I've only been in this position for 3 years. And there was a loss team in place when I started. And I was told, I was going to be part of that. And I was on board because, like Brandy said, when I was new to grief, I wish there'd been somebody there to tell me that I wasn't going crazy, that, all those things. But there was nobody to normalize things for me and validate. Anyway, I was totally on board with the loss team. And just in the last few, like even 10, 11 months, we've noticed just a dramatic dwindling of being contacted by law enforcement. And we used to have pretty good support. Some detectives were better than others, but I felt really useful when I would go to those scenes, even if I had to walk past the scene of the suicide and go get some clothes for somebody or a drink of water or whatever. But we actually confronted law enforcement not too long ago. Our CEO did, and we are just getting tremendous pushback. They are saying it's illegal for them to call us. That because of Marcy's law and other things, they can't call us. And what happens is then we have our survivors who are basically lost in the wilderness, and they do find us and they do come to support group and use our services, but it's 3 to 6 to a year later, 3 to 6 months or a year later. And I just think of the shame of those people sitting around not knowing, that we're out there, that we have services. So I guess it sounds like you guys have complete cooperation from law enforcement.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's everywhere, but I know that it just takes, I don't know. I think each area is different, but definitely work to keep those relationships strong. And I know some areas have a really hard time. Like Frank Campbell, you know, Marilyn mentioned, is the one who started it. And he, I think at one point, like took a year to just get a meeting with the law enforcement. So it's not uncommon to have pushback.
Marilyn, how did you, because we work very closely with every law enforcement chaplain group in Northern California. How did you make those connections?
Oh gosh, I don't know. We've had them for so many years. Some of them I know better than others. I was supposed to train a whole group of them just last week. Of course, that got changed. We're going to do it later. But it has been because we've been here for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
A very, very local one wrecked in our city, in our county. There's 10 counties or 9 counties around Sacramento close by, and they've each got law enforcement chaplains, but a lot of places don't have law enforcement chaplains, so then you'd have to work with police. That may be a little bit harder, but I met them personally somewhere along the line and developed a friendship with them, and that's how we got connected. And we always make sure that they have plenty of our brochures with them, and all their chaplains carry our brochures, so at least they have a brochure that they can leave. If nothing else, I just encourage you, if you're doing this, is to have a really good brochure. Susan has recently redone ours. It has forget-me-nots on the front cover. You'd want to open it up and see what it says. So have a good brochure and just have it out. The other thing you might do in order to, especially in other areas, is to get an article in the paper, in the local newspaper. You can, one of your families that ones you know maybe would tell their story on the front page. I mean, that's how we got started, actually. We had our story on the front page of the Sacramento Bee about a year after we started.
That's a very good idea. I'll tell you, in one of my classes that I held last fall, one of my 10-week classes, I spoke about Lost Team, and every single person in that class, and there were 7 of them, they all said, why wasn't this offered to us? One mom said that she couldn't walk after they left the scene and took her son's body away. She said she sat in the alley on the gravel and just couldn't even get up. And I just bled for her. And she said the police walked by and never said, can we call anybody? Or, she was just left alone, sobbing in an alley.
Oh, how that's awful. That's abuse. I'm sorry, but that's abuse. I look on that as abuse. So do you have chaplains? Do you have chaplains in your community? Because some communities have law enforcement chaplaincies and some of them don't. So
we do have a very large law enforcement chaplaincy that started a couple of years ago. And I want to say, I think that's part of the problem, is that they've almost like closed ranks, and it's kind of like, we'll take care of this. We don't need you.
But
and
make sure they have brochures then, if they won't let you go out with you.
We have what we call a survivor's packet with lots of information, but we also had just a simple brochure. They said that's too bulky, we can't carry all those. So then we made up a wallet card, like a little bifold wallet card. And it's just so frustrating,
Yeah, get an article in the paper. If there's any kind of a listing of local resources that's printed out or posted somewhere. 211, I know, has them. I don't know if you can get some public service announcements on your radio, television, or something, and just let people know that you do have this service that you're providing. But it does make a difference if you actually meet somebody like a Lost Team, because then they feel comfortable with that person that they met at that moment. And so therefore, they're more likely then to pursue getting that resource for themselves ongoing. And I'm sorry, but I think you just don't give up. Harass them. Right?
Maryland's pretty good about that, but
Don't smile and, I don't know what's it going to take. Maybe it needs to be maybe they need to have a suicide happen in their families before they get it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just sad, and you don't want it to happen that way, but sometimes that's how we get people to have a heart to do this.
Right. So Marilyn, we only have 1 minute left, but I did want to, Jennifer, thank you so much. What I would suggest is call the office and talk to Marilyn about, we do, I don't know, we are in a lot of funeral homes as well. Our brochure is out there. Last year we did a huge mailing to all the every doctor in the Kaiser Psychiatry Department of Northern California. Marilyn does a lot of speaking engagements, but I would suggest calling her, and then you guys can brainstorm a little bit. She's got 37 years of experience under her belt, so she's a wealth of information. Aren't you, Marilyn?
You might try hospice is another connection. Make connections in the other parts of the community that have to do with death.
Yeah.
Funeral directors, hospice, whatever else, pastors.
She can call you too, and you guys can talk about that.
Yeah, glad to do that. Be glad. Any one of you that is thinking about doing some of this, please call us. We've got lots of good material. We can help you. That was been my real long-term life goal, is to improve the resources across this country for families like ours.
Well, we are at the end of our webinar this evening. So Brandy, would you like to say any final thoughts, or?
I don't know, just thank you for having me, and for all of those. I don't know, I mean, there's 13 people or so on here. I don't know where you're at in your grief, if it was last week or 50 years ago, but you're not alone. And I think one of the greatest thing that I was told right the day that my mom died is my dad took me into another room, and he just said, this wasn't your fault. If you hadn't have left the house that day, it doesn't mean she'd still be alive. She might have done it the next day or the next week. And so I think survivors hold a lot of guilt, right? And so I think that sometimes it's just really good to hear. I know that we sometimes know that in our head, but we don't really believe it in our hearts. And so just really being kind to yourself, and that this wasn't your fault, and then this wasn't, it wasn't that you didn't measure up, and so reach out to your community and to this group, and yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Marilyn. Thank you as well for being here. And thank you so much, everybody, for attending. This recording will be on our website, so you can watch it a little later.
Let other people know maybe about it.
No, they'd like to watch it. Yeah, and thank you so much, Brandy. We really appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely, Brandy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much, and everybody be safe and be well. And if you please check out our website if you want to come to one of our support group meetings. You have to register, but it's under support resources and meetings. We're having virtual bereavement support group meetings through the end of May, and then we'll just have to see, if we're able to resume our in-person meetings. But for now, we'll have virtual. So please plan to attend. All right, everyone. Good night. Thank you so much.